I don't even know where to start. I guess it all started with the small stuff at first, little things I couldn't shake. My wife, Rachel, started acting different. It wasn't anything huge, just these tiny shifts in her behavior that, over time, built up. She works in a pretty demanding job, but for the past few months, she'd been staying later than usual. It was always the same excuse: I have to finish up some reports, or I've got an important meeting. I didn't think much of it at first. She's always been the more career-driven one between us, so I figured, yeah, she's just busy. But then, I started noticing things like how she'd go to the gym after work. Nothing new, really. She's always been into staying fit, but it started to feel like she was always going. And it wasn't just a quick workout anymore. She'd be gone for hours, sometimes until late in the evening. It was almost like she was trying to avoid being home. And when she did come home, she'd be different. She'd be distant, cold, almost irritated by my presence. I know it sounds stupid, but it was like the little things stacked up. She'd be more protective of her phone, always having it face down, never letting me see what she was texting. Even if I asked about her day, she'd give these weird, vague answers. Like, I could tell she wasn't telling me everything, but she'd get all defensive if I tried to push for more details. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was. I mean, she's my wife, right? I've known her for years. I trust her. But I also trust that gut feeling when something's off, and mine was screaming at me. One night, I finally snapped and asked her straight up, "What's going on, Rachel? You've been acting strange lately." She looked at me like I was crazy. "What do you mean?" "I've just been busy, that's all," she said, giving me one of those fake smiles. The kind where I could tell she was hiding something. Her eyes were darting around like she couldn't make eye contact for more than a second. I felt stupid for asking. Maybe I was imagining things. I wanted to believe her. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't add up. But I didn't do anything yet. Not immediately. I just kept an eye on things, not sure what I was hoping to find. And honestly, I didn't want to find anything. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't trust his own wife. But that gut feeling didn't go away. It kept nagging at me. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, you know? So I tried to ignore the pit in my stomach, but it was like something was eating away at me every time she walked out the door or didn't come home on time. It's like I knew deep down, something wasn't right. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to figure it out, to know for sure if I was just overthinking things or if something was really going on. I don't know what made me do it, but one night, I downloaded a phone tracking app. Yeah, I know, it sounds creepy and desperate, but I was desperate. At that point, I was already pretty convinced something was up, but I couldn't bring myself to just ask her about it again. I couldn't be the guy who was always questioning her, right? I wasn't even sure how I was going to use the app. Was I really going to follow her around? Was I that far gone? But once I had it installed, it felt like there was no turning back. It started innocently enough. I just wanted to know if she was where she said she was. So when she told me she was going to the gym one evening, I pulled up the app to see if she was really there. And she was. I told myself, see? Everything's fine. You're just paranoid. But then, it started to get weird. After that, I couldn't help myself. I'd check it every day, just to see where she was going. Some nights, I'd see her at the gym, other nights, she'd be at some random coffee shop for a couple of hours. And I started to notice the patterns. She'd always make sure to tell me she was doing something important after work, but it was always at odd hours. Never when I expected. It didn't stop there. I also noticed how she was acting when she came home. She wasn't home when she was here, if that makes sense. She'd be physically present, but emotionally detached. When I tried to talk to her about her day, it felt like she was just giving me the bare minimum. The conversation would get cut short quickly, like she was eager to be somewhere else. The worst part? She started changing her appearance. I know, that sounds superficial, but hear me out. She was always one of those women who didn't really care much about how she looked around me. But recently, she started putting more effort into her appearance. Like, she'd do her hair a certain way before going out, wear makeup when she didn't need to, and even started dressing a little too sharp when she went to work. I'm talking about clothes she'd never wear before. She's a smart dresser, but now? She was dressing like she was trying to impress someone. It made me feel like I was losing my mind. So I kept checking the app. I told myself I was just being cautious, just making sure I wasn't seeing things. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just looking out for her safety or well-being. I was looking for signs. Signs that I didn't want to find, but knew I might. And then one night, I saw something I couldn't ignore. It was a Thursday night. Rachel had told me she was going out for drinks with some of her coworkers. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd done that a few times, nothing weird about it. But something about that night felt different. She didn't seem as bothered by the idea of me staying home with our son. Normally, she'd make a big deal out of how I needed to entertain him and make sure he's tucked in on time, but this time, she was just gone. Almost too quickly. So, I did what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I checked the phone app again. I didn't expect much, but there it was, clear as day. She wasn't at the bar with her coworkers like she said. She was somewhere else. I should have been shocked or maybe angry, but it just felt like the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. I knew where she was. She was with him. Her lover. I hadn't even realized I'd been suspecting him for weeks until that moment. He worked at her office, a guy named James. From what I'd heard over the years, he was the charming one, the guy everyone liked but no one took seriously. She always mentioned him in passing, like a joke or a casual reference, but something about the way she talked about him never sat right with me. She was too comfortable mentioning him. Too easy. I didn't confront her that night. Hell, I didn't even try to figure out where she was. I was paralyzed by this sick feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to suspect something, it was another to know for sure. I couldn't bring myself to call her, couldn't bear the thought of hearing her lie straight to my face. So I just sat there, staring at the screen, letting the truth sink in. I should have felt angry, but I didn't. At first, I just felt numb, like I was in a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. I was stuck in this limbo between knowing what was happening and not being able to do anything about it. And then the anger came. It came like a flood. I could feel it boiling up inside me, rising from my chest to my throat, but I didn't know where to direct it. Her? Him? Myself? The next morning, I woke up early, before she did. She'd come home late, and I was still pretending to sleep when she got in, hoping she wouldn't notice the way my mind was spinning. But she did. She always did. She came into the bedroom and kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal. "Morning, babe. Did you sleep okay?" I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, trying to gauge if she knew I knew. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look anything like what I expected. It was almost like she was playing a role. It felt like she was waiting for me to say something. And I hated it. I hated how calm she was. "I'm fine," I muttered, finally breaking the silence. That was it. That was all I could muster. I didn't want to blow this up yet. I wasn't ready. Part of me still wanted to believe this was all just some mistake or misunderstanding. Maybe there was an explanation. But another part of me, the part that had been suffocating for months, was getting angrier by the second. I was starting to think, I know what you're doing. And now? Now I was going to figure out how to stop it. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, work, taking care of our son, pretending like everything was fine, but inside, I felt like I was on the edge of something. The truth had settled in, and there was no ignoring it anymore. Rachel was having an affair. I knew it, and part of me wanted to scream it out loud, but I was stuck in this weird limbo where I wasn't sure what my next step was. I kept thinking back to that night, staring at my phone, seeing her location. I was so angry, so betrayed, but I couldn't act on it yet. I needed proof. I needed to know it wasn't just my suspicions running wild. I needed something I could hold on to. So, I started snooping. Yeah, I know, this is where things start to get ugly. But what else was I supposed to do? Confront her with nothing? Ask her, "Hey, are you cheating on me?" and just take her word for it when she said no? I wasn't that stupid. One night, I decided to look through her things. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, I didn't care. I had to know. I started with her purse. Nothing. Then I tried her laptop, which she always left open. But no luck there either. Rachel had become an expert at covering her tracks. She had gotten smart too. But there was one thing I hadn't thought to check: her emails. She kept them pretty organized, always sorting through work and personal stuff, but I had this feeling that the answers were hiding there. I don't know what drove me to it. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the thought that if I didn't do something soon, I'd lose my mind. So I sat down and without much thought, typed in her password. It worked. I don't know why I wasn't more shocked. She'd always used the same password for everything. I clicked on her inbox, and there it was. A thread of messages that would change everything. The first email was innocuous enough, just a friendly back and forth about work. But as I scrolled down, my stomach turned. The emails became personal. There were references to late nights at the office, to dinners they'd had, just the two of them, and little inside jokes that made my skin crawl. And then the worst part, a series of late-night exchanges, talking about how much they missed each other, how she couldn't wait to see him again, and how their meetings were the only time she really felt alive. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was screaming at me to close the laptop, to stop before I found out even more. But I couldn't. It was like the floodgates had opened, and now I couldn't stop looking. One email in particular hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a confession of sorts. She was talking about how she felt trapped in our marriage and how James made her feel like she mattered again. It was as if I wasn't even there, just a man who was convenient when it suited her, but someone who she didn't even see anymore. It felt like I was reading her soul in those messages. All the things she'd never said to me. All the things I thought were just little cracks in our relationship were actually gaping holes. But still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what would happen next. Fear of losing everything. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around the house, staring at the screen, reading and rereading the emails. And that's when it hit me. I had all the proof I needed now. She was having an affair. And what was worse, she didn't even feel guilty about it. At that moment, something inside me snapped. The anger, the confusion, it was all bubbling up to the surface. But instead of confronting her, I went silent. I decided to wait. I needed a plan. I couldn't let her get away with this, not without feeling the weight of what she'd done. So, I waited. I let her continue her lies, her little double life, thinking I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. I was done being the guy who just accepted her excuses. I was going to make her feel the way I felt. A week passed, and every time Rachel came home, I felt like I was living in some twisted game. She was acting like everything was fine, talking about her day, asking me about mine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of knowing what she'd been up to. Then one night, it happened. Rachel left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. I don't know what came over me, but I knew. I knew this was the moment. I grabbed it. For a second, I thought about putting it down, walking away, but I couldn't. My heart was pounding as I unlocked it. Thankfully, she didn't have a password on it. And there it was, a series of texts from James. Some were sweet, others steamy, but all of them were full of lies. She was telling him how much she loved him, how she couldn't wait to see him. She was planning her next meeting with him, talking about how she had to keep things quiet. I felt like I was going to choke on my own rage. The betrayal was clear, undeniable. When she came out of the shower, I handed her the phone. She looked at me, confused. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. She stared at the texts, her face going pale as the reality hit her. She tried to brush it off, to give me some excuse, but I couldn't listen anymore. I just shook my head. "I know everything, Rachel. It's over." She started crying, begging me not to leave, but I couldn't listen to her anymore. I was done. It was like everything I'd been holding in for weeks came crashing down all at once. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I didn't even ask her why. I just knew I couldn't keep living like this. Rachel tried everything. She begged, she apologized, she promised she would change. She even cried, real tears, I think, but it didn't matter. I had nothing left to say to her. Every word she said just felt like another lie, another attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I couldn't trust anything that came out of her mouth anymore. It was like I was watching a version of her I didn't even recognize. The woman I thought I knew, the one I built a life with, the one who had promised me forever, was gone. And in her place? Someone who had been sneaking around behind my back, playing this little game, pretending like everything was fine. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, holding onto my arm, like I was going to listen to her excuses. "Really?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Because that's exactly what it looks like." She started to say something, but I cut her off. Stop. Just stop. It was hard, so damn hard, not to lash out at her, not to scream about everything I'd just uncovered. But I couldn't. I just wanted out. I wanted peace, even if it meant living in a house filled with tension and silence for the next few days. I didn't leave that night. We had a young child together, and I wasn't about to turn his life upside down with some dramatic showdown. So, we stayed in the same house. But I could feel the walls closing in on me. Every time she came near me, I had to remind myself that she was no longer the person I thought she was. The following days were filled with awkward silence. She'd try to make small talk, act like nothing had changed, but I couldn't pretend. Every time she touched me, I wanted to recoil. I couldn't look at her without feeling disgusted. At night, I couldn't sleep. My mind would race with the image of her with him. What had she seen in James? Was I not enough? Did I do something to drive her away? It was impossible not to feel like a failure. But there was another part of me that kept telling myself, this isn't on you. She made her choice. Still, I couldn't figure out what came next. I wasn't ready to confront James. I didn't want to turn into some guy who spends his life chasing after revenge. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. Something had to change. I decided it was time to take control of the situation. Rachel was going to feel the consequences of what she'd done. But it wasn't going to be a quick confrontation. No, I was going to make her feel every bit of that betrayal. I wasn't sure how yet, but I had a feeling I'd know what to do when the time came. For now, I just sat with my anger and the sick realization that the life I thought I had was gone. The days that followed were strange. Rachel was still trying to play the part of a loving wife, but I couldn't even look at her without wanting to puke. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, the real her, and it wasn't someone I wanted in my life. She tried to be affectionate, kept saying she was sorry, that she wanted to fix everything, but I couldn't get the image of her with him out of my head. The way she had looked at him, the way she'd chosen him. I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. At first, I told myself I was going to stay calm. I was going to handle this the right way, keep things civil for the sake of our son, and then slowly figure out what my next move would be. But inside, I was burning. Every time I saw her acting like everything was fine, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. She didn't deserve my forgiveness. She didn't deserve any of my kindness. So, I decided to let the guilt go. I wasn't the one who needed to feel bad here. I didn't make any big dramatic confrontations or throw a bunch of stuff around. That wouldn't satisfy me. No, I was going to do something that would hurt her the most. I was going to take everything she loved and remind her of it, bit by bit. First, I started being distant. Not the sad, emotionally unavailable husband, kind of distant. No, I was polite. I'd ask about her day, play with our son, go through the motions, but there was nothing behind it. No warmth, no affection. It was like she was a stranger to me now. Every time she tried to hug me or kiss me, I just pulled away. And the worst part? She noticed. At first, she tried to brush it off, like I was just upset and needed time. But it started to get to her. You could see the cracks in her face, the desperation in her eyes. She didn't know how to handle it. She couldn't handle it. I wasn't reacting the way she expected. She couldn't just apologize and make it all go away. I also started pulling back with our son. I didn't want to. I loved him more than anything, but I had to make her see. I was still doing my part as a dad, but I stopped letting her see me as the guy who would just sweep things under the rug for her. I didn't want her to feel like everything was still normal. She needed to understand that what she'd done had shattered something that couldn't be put back together. A few days later, I went through her things again. I found another email, this time, a message from James. It was almost like he was taunting me. He wrote about how he couldn't wait to see her again, how their secret meetings were the highlight of his week. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to stay in this toxic, hollow marriage for the rest of my life. Rachel was going to feel the weight of this affair. I wasn't going to be the one who just moved on for the sake of our son. She was going to see what happens when you break trust in a way that can't be fixed with an apology. But I wasn't just going to leave her. No, I had something more in mind. Something that would make her regret ever thinking she could pull this off without facing the consequences. I started planning. It was going to take time. I wasn't rushing this. The revenge would come when she least expected it. And when it did, she'd know exactly why it was happening. I didn't rush it. No, I was patient, too patient maybe, but that's what made it all feel so much sweeter. I knew I couldn't confront Rachel directly, that wouldn't be satisfying. I had to make her feel the gravity of what she'd done, make her see the consequences in a way that would stay with her. First thing I did was stop being the guy who always fixed everything. The guy who always came home early to help with dinner, or made excuses for her when she didn't pull her weight. If she wanted to break this family, fine. But I wasn't going to be the one holding it together anymore. Every time she asked me for something, whether it was a favor or help with something small, I'd give her a half-assed response. I'll do it later. I'm busy. And when she'd push me, I'd say, you figure it out. I was done being her emotional crutch. Done being her fallback option when things didn't work out with James. Then, I started with the small, personal touches. I stopped texting her just to check in during the day. I didn't leave cute notes for her like I used to. I didn't even really engage when she tried to start a conversation. Little things that let her know I was pulling away, and that I was aware of what she was doing. The hardest part was keeping it all under wraps, especially when she tried to act like everything was fine. It was like she was living in her own little bubble, expecting me to forgive her because, hey, she was still the mother of our child, right? But I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't act like nothing had happened. Then came the moment I knew I had to act on. She'd started getting texts from James again. Nothing too overt, but there were enough to show that she hadn't really let go of him. That was when I made my move. I saved those texts. The ones that really hit hard. I kept them on my phone, just waiting for the right time. I wasn't going to expose everything right away. I was going to make her suffer for a while longer. The silence, the emotional distance, those were the things that would start breaking her down. I could see it already. She was starting to question herself. I was the one who had control now. And the longer I held back, the more it gnawed at her. The tension in the house was thick. Rachel could feel it, I could feel it, and most importantly, our son could feel it. The poor kid was caught in the middle, and it sucked. But as much as I hated seeing him confused, I couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. Rachel kept trying to act normal. She'd still ask me if I wanted to go out for dinner, or if I needed anything. But every time she did, it felt like she was forcing it. She was trying to create the illusion that things were fine, but I could see through it now. The cracks in her act were becoming more and more obvious. It was hard, I won't lie. Sometimes, I'd get this feeling, this pang of guilt, when I'd hear her voice crack, or see her face when she'd realize I wasn't responding to her the way I used to. But then I'd remember the texts, the emails, the way she betrayed me for months, all while acting like nothing was wrong. I didn't want to hurt her, but I wasn't going to be her fool anymore. One night, things came to a head. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV with our son, when Rachel came in. She'd been out, meeting a friend from work, and as usual, she was late. She stood in the doorway for a second, staring at me. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell she was waiting for me to acknowledge her. Like I used to. Like it was just another day. But I didn't. She stepped closer, looking for a reaction. Mark, we need to talk. I didn't look up from the TV. About what? I'm serious. We can't keep doing this. Her voice was softer now, a little shaky. You're pushing me away, and it's not fair to either of us. I finally looked at her, but only for a second. I'm not the one who made things unfair, Rachel. Her eyes widened. She was trying to keep it together, but I could see the cracks. The frustration. She was used to being in control, used to being the one with all the answers. Now, she had nothing left to hold on to. I didn't say anything more. I just turned back to the TV. If she wanted to talk, she could do it on her own time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw it. Real vulnerability. She wasn't the strong, independent woman she pretended to be anymore. She was just a woman who had made a massive mistake, and now she had to live with the consequences. That night, I didn't do anything drastic. I didn't call James, I didn't throw her out, I didn't even yell. But I felt it. The power had shifted. And I could tell Rachel felt it too. A few days passed after that tense night, and Rachel was walking on eggshells around me. I could see it. The way she'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, how she tried to be extra sweet whenever I was around. It was like she was waiting for me to forgive her, to tell her that everything was going to be okay. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not yet. Then one evening, she finally cornered me. We were sitting in the kitchen, having dinner with our son, when she looked up from her plate. "Mark, I can't do this anymore. We need to talk about us. About what's happening." I put my fork down slowly, met her gaze. "What's there to talk about?" "I know I messed up," she said, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking about it non-stop. About how I hurt you. I want to fix this. I want us to go back to the way things were." I could see the genuine guilt in her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. "Not after everything. You think you can just fix this?" I asked, my voice cold. "You think saying sorry is enough? After everything? After James?" She flinched at his name, but I wasn't done. "You want to fix it? Start by explaining why I should even trust you again. Why I should believe a word you say." She looked away, her face reddening. She didn't have an answer. She didn't get it yet. "I never meant for it to get this far," she finally said, almost pleading. "I was lonely, Mark. I felt like you didn't care about me anymore. And James, he was there, you know? He made me feel wanted." I shook my head. "No. You don't get to blame this on me. You made the choice. You decided to lie, to sneak around behind my back. Don't make it sound like you had no control over it." I could see her breaking, but I didn't feel bad. I couldn't. I wasn't the one who destroyed everything. "I love you, Mark," she said, her voice cracking. "I love you. I know it's too late to fix everything, but please, can we try? For us." I stood up, not wanting to hear it anymore. "I don't know who you are anymore, Rachel. You're not the woman I married. I can't just forget what you did. I don't even know if I can look at you the same way." She reached out to grab my arm, but I pulled away. She was desperate. I could feel it. The realization that she had pushed me too far. The thing was, I was already too far gone. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't trying to fix this. I wasn't trying to go back to before. This was my chance to finally let go. To stop being the guy who just took her back because I was afraid of change. "You should have thought about that before," I said quietly, not looking at her. "Before you decided I wasn't enough." I walked out of the kitchen without another word. I didn't need to hear her apologies anymore. I didn't need her tears. I had already made my decision. She could apologize all she wanted, but it didn't change anything. And I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. Not this time. After that night, things got quieter. The house felt colder. Rachel was still trying, of course. She'd leave me little notes, ask how my day was, even tried to plan a family outing, anything to get me to crack, to act like I hadn't just seen through her act. But I didn't respond. Not the way she wanted me to. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to break. But I had no intention of doing that. If she thought that guilt trips and emotional pleas would make me change my mind, she was seriously underestimating me. I stayed distant. Calm. Too calm. She'd bring up things like, "Remember when we went to the beach last summer? Or we should start looking at houses again, you know, once things settle down." I'd give her short answers like yeah or maybe. I didn't want to engage. I wasn't going to let her rewrite what had happened, make me think we could just go back to normal. But I also wasn't going to let this go on forever. I was waiting for the right moment to hit her where it would hurt the most. I wasn't just going to let her go on pretending that we could just move on. No. There had to be consequences. There had to be something that made her understand what she'd thrown away. I began organizing things behind the scenes. I was careful, methodical. I made sure Rachel didn't suspect anything. The last thing I needed was for her to get defensive or try to manipulate me into thinking I was wrong for feeling the way I did. I called a lawyer. I started looking into our finances, how we could separate without dragging our son through some messy battle. I wasn't looking to punish her, but I was also sure as hell not going to let her walk away from this unscathed. But here's the thing, it wasn't just about the divorce. I wasn't ready to end it just yet. No, I wanted her to feel this. I wanted her to be aware of every moment I was slipping away. Because every time I distanced myself, every time I shut her down, she looked like she was losing control. The power had shifted. And Rachel wasn't even aware of it yet. Some nights, I'd hear her crying in the bedroom. Sometimes I'd hear her phone buzzing, maybe a message from James. And it was tempting to go in there and demand answers. It was tempting to throw it all in her face. But I didn't. I just kept waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment. For the one thing that would make her see everything she had lost. And it was coming. Slowly. But it was coming. A couple of weeks passed, and Rachel was starting to look like a shell of her former self. I could see it in her eyes. The bags under her eyes. The way she'd look at me, hoping for some sign that I was ready to let her in again, but I was steadfast. I wasn't going to soften. Not after everything. But there was something that shifted. I don't know if it was her desperation, or if it was just that she was worn down enough, but one night, when she was putting our son to bed, she finally broke. I could hear her sobbing from the other room. At first, I thought it was just her usual crying, the kind where she tries to make me feel bad, like she always did when she wanted me to come and comfort her. But this time, it was different. It was raw. She wasn't pretending. I waited for a moment, thinking maybe it was just another act. But something inside me told me to go check on her. I walked to the bedroom, and there she was, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I stood there for a second, unsure if I should say anything. The old part of me, the part that used to care, wanted to rush over and hold her. But the new me? The one who had seen what she was capable of? He wasn't moved. Not anymore. Finally, she looked up, her face streaked with tears. She didn't even try to hide it this time. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't lose you. I can't." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "You already did, Rachel." Her breath hitched. "I was stupid. I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, but I swear I want to fix it. I need you. I love you." I stood there in silence, watching her fall apart. Part of me wanted to reach out, wanted to believe her words, to give her that chance. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed so badly, felt like it was choking. "You should have thought of that before," I said quietly, my voice colder than I meant. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, not even giving her a second to try to convince me. "Mark, please don't do this. I'll do anything. Anything." I felt a flicker of something, maybe it was pity, or maybe it was just the emptiness of this situation. But I didn't feel like I was the one who needed to fix things anymore. I wasn't the one who needed to beg. She had lost that privilege when she decided that a affair was worth more than our family. "I'm not the one who needs to do anything," I said, stepping back. "You're the one who broke this." She tried to speak, but I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there, crying quietly. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel the need to console her. All I felt was a sense of finality. This was the last time I was going to listen to her beg for something she didn't deserve. The hardest part was over. I had nothing left to give her, and now I was finally free. Things went quiet again for a few days, but Rachel was starting to crack. She'd try little gestures, baking cookies, suggesting family movie nights, even saying she was going to therapy to work on herself. It was all a show, though. I wasn't buying it. She thought a few acts of fixing things could erase everything she'd done. I wasn't fooled anymore. Then one night, after a long day at work, I came home to find Rachel standing there, holding her phone. She had that fake smile on her face again, the one she used when she was trying to pretend everything was okay. She sat down next to me on the couch, and I could tell something was coming. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't even look up. "About what?" "You're not being fair," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and desperation. "You're shutting me out. What happened to the man I married?" I couldn't keep it in anymore. What happened to the woman I married? I shot back, my voice biting. The one who wasn't sneaking around behind my back? She flinched. "It wasn't like that. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." A moment of weakness. I interrupted. "You don't get to call it that. You chose this. You lied. You hurt me. Don't act like I'm the one being unfair." She stood up, her eyes wide with panic. "Mark, please. I can't fix this if you won't even give me a chance." I stood too, feeling the anger rise. "You don't get to fix this. It's too late." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done pretending. I'm done with you." Her face crumpled. "What? No, you can't be serious." "I am," I said, my words final. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm out." She stood there, stunned, as if she couldn't comprehend it. "But we have a family." You can't just walk away. We did have a family, I said, shaking my head. But you destroyed that. You made this choice. The room fell silent. Rachel was still standing there, but I wasn't going to stay and argue anymore. I walked out of the room, and this time, I didn't feel anger. I felt something else, relief. I had made my decision. Now, it was time for her to face the consequences. The days dragged on like I was walking through mud. The house felt different now, emptier. I'd wake up in the mornings, and it would take me a second to remember why everything felt so off. Then it would hit me, and I'd feel that tight knot in my chest again. Rachel was still here, still trying to play the part of the wife, but it was impossible to pretend that things weren't broken beyond repair. She was walking on eggshells, watching me, trying to figure out when I'd finally snap and let her back in. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not now. Her attempts to make things feel normal were so painfully obvious. She'd try to have small conversations with me like we were still a couple, asking how work was, talking about trivial stuff like our son's new favorite show. But I kept it short, kept it distant. I wouldn't let her slip back into the role she used to play. I wasn't fooled anymore. Not by her fake sweetness, not by the long talks about how we needed to reconnect. There was one night, though, when she didn't try to pretend. It was just before dinner. I was sitting on the couch flipping through channels when she walked in, and this time, there was something different in her eyes. She didn't look hopeful, didn't look like she was trying to put on a show. She looked broken. "Mark," she said quietly, standing in front of me. "I need to talk. Really talk." I didn't answer right away. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, but I wasn't going to let her get to me. Not now. Not after everything. I stayed silent, waiting for her to say whatever it was she thought was going to change my mind. She sat down next to me, but there was an air of finality about her. The kind of silence that told me she knew what was coming, but wasn't ready to admit it yet. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice quiet. "I've been trying to figure out where we went wrong. And I realize it was all my fault." I didn't even look at her. I just kept my eyes on the TV, though I wasn't really watching. "You think saying that is going to fix everything?" I asked, my voice flat. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking a little. "I'm sorry for everything. For the lies, for the cheating. I swear I never meant to hurt you. I felt like I was fading. I felt invisible." I turned to face her then, really looked at her for the first time in a while. She wasn't the woman I'd married. She wasn't the woman I trusted. She was just a person who had broken everything for a moment of selfishness. "You felt invisible?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "And so you decided to destroy your family? Destroy me? That's your excuse." She winced at my words, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I thought it would fix everything. I thought if I just felt wanted again, if I could just escape from all the responsibility, from being stuck in this routine, then I'd be happy again." She reached for my hand, but I pulled it back quickly. "You're telling me you thought James was the answer?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You didn't stop and think about the consequences? You didn't think about how this would destroy everything we built?" "I didn't think," she admitted, her eyes filled with shame. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just a stupid fling, but then it got out of hand. I got in too deep, and then I couldn't get out. And now," her voice trailed off, and she swallowed hard. I shook my head. "You're right. Now it's too late." Her face crumbled, and she dropped her eyes to the floor, suddenly quiet. "Please, don't leave me. Please, I need you. I love you." The words sounded hollow to me. I didn't feel them anymore. The love I'd once had for her was buried under so much betrayal and hurt that it had turned cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just numb. "You don't love me," I said, my voice low and steady. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have thrown everything away for some guy you barely knew." She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath, but she didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. "I'm filing for divorce," I said finally, my voice firm. "Tomorrow." She looked up at me then, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mark, please don't do this. We can still fix this, I swear. I'll do anything. Anything." I stood up from the couch, walking toward the door. "It's too late for that. You made your choice. And now, I'm making mine. She stood up too, reaching for me one last time. Don't go. Please, don't leave me like this. I turned to face her, and for a second, I felt something close to regret. But it didn't last long. It couldn't. You should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't enough for you. I'm done. You need to deal with the mess you made. I didn't stay to hear her plea. I walked out of the room, walking straight to the guest room. I needed space. I needed to think. But there was one thing I hadn't told her. One thing she still didn't know. While Rachel had been so focused on her own guilt, trying to convince me she'd changed, I'd been busy too. I'd been doing my own digging. I'd seen the texts. I knew everything about the affair, how long it had gone on, the things they said to each other, how much she had invested in James. But the thing was, I wasn't going to tell her that yet. Not until I was ready. She had no idea, but I had one last card to play. Something to show her that I wasn't just letting her go easily. I wasn't finished with Rachel yet. Not by a long shot. A few days passed, and Rachel kept trying, too hard. The apologies, the promises to change. But I was done. I didn't even engage anymore, just kept to myself. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Just cold. One night, she came into the living room while I was sitting on the couch, eyes red from crying. Mark, please. I know I messed up, but I can't fix this if you won't let me. I didn't look at her. It's too late for that. Her voice wavered. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Please. I shook my head. You had your chance. You threw it away. She stood there, stunned, trying to find the right words. But I was done listening. I know everything, I said, finally looking up. The texts. The lies. You don't get to keep playing this game. Not anymore. Her face drained of color. You read my phone? I didn't answer. The silence said it all. She knew I was done. Mark, please don't do this, she whispered. I love you. I need you. I stood up, stepping toward the door. You don't love me. You loved the version of me that suited your needs, not the real me. And now I'm done. She tried to reach out to me, but I didn't let her. I don't want anything from you. I'm done. I walked out of the room, went straight to my computer, and filed for divorce. No hesitation. No second guessing. I wasn't looking back. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one last thing to do. I contacted James. I had the proof, texts, emails, everything. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I sent him a message. You ruined my life. Now, you'll feel the consequences too. When Rachel found out, she'd understand. I wasn't just walking away. I was making sure she and her lover paid for what they'd done. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.